Space is vast, cold, and mercilessly quiet. For centuries, humanity believed it understood that silence, the mathematical order of planets, the predictable rhythm of comets, the frozen logic of celestial mechanics. Yet every so often, the universe reminds us that we know almost nothing about the dark that surrounds us. In late 2024, a pulse of light crossed the detectors of NASA's Deep Sky Survey. It was faint, a glimmer that lasted less than a heartbeat, but it carried a signature unlike anything recorded before. The automated system flagged it, cataloged it, and almost forgot it. Then the same pulse appeared again and again, each night a little brighter, a little closer. When analysts traced its trajectory backward, the numbers refused to obey gravity. Whatever this was, it wasn't from here. Astronomers named it 3I/Atlas, the third confirmed interstellar object to visit our solar system after Oumuamua and Borisov. But even among such rare wanderers, this one was different. Its path was erratic, its spin unstable, its speed too slow for an object merely passing through, too fast for anything captured by the sun. It behaved as if it were testing the limits of motion itself. Telescopes from Chile to Japan turned toward the coordinates. The image that emerged was haunting, a dark, elongated body glinting with streaks of metallic reflection. Jets of dust erupted from beneath its surface, yet not in the random fashion of comets. The plumes were patterned, pulsing in intervals, as though responding to some internal rhythm. At first the headlines were quiet. A few science blogs mentioned an unusual comet. A handful of observers speculated it might be a fragment from another star's debris field. But within weeks, 3I/Atlas began to behave like nothing ever seen. It changed brightness irregularly, as if turning itself toward the sun and then away, like a creature adjusting its gaze. In the control rooms of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, monitors streamed constant data. Every scientist watching felt the same unspoken tension. Curiosity mixed with fear. Humanity was staring at an interstellar stranger, and for the first time, the stranger seemed to be staring back. No propulsion could be seen, yet its path bent slightly, correcting itself. That motion defied the laws every textbook had sworn were unbreakable. Some suggested outgassing, a natural jet pushing it off course, but the vectors didn't match. The thrust appeared aimed. By December 2024, the object crossed the orbit of Jupiter. The world below went about its business, unaware that something older than our civilization was gliding silently above. Only in the observatories, where the air smelled of metal and sleeplessness, did people whisper that perhaps 3I/Atlas was not a comet at all. Data streamed faster. Spectral scans revealed traces of compounds that shouldn't coexist. Crystalline carbon lattices interwoven with metallic hydrogen signatures. The press office drafted a cautious statement. Further analysis required. Yet behind closed doors, the scientists had already drawn their conclusions. Whatever this was, it was built by physics they didn't understand. The signal-to-noise ratio of its radar echo fluctuated like a heartbeat. When they amplified the waveform, a repeating pattern appeared. 3 pulses, then silence. 3 pulses again. Coincidence, perhaps. But coincidences in deep space are rare. As it approached the inner solar system, the object's surface began to shimmer faintly. The sun's light refracted across geometric ridges carved into its shell. Observers compared it to the hull of a ship, scarred, ancient, and drifting without crew. For weeks, the world's telescopes followed its approach. Governments issued quiet directives to share all tracking data with NASA. Astronomers exchanged encrypted files over private networks. And still, 3I/Atlas moved as if it knew it was being watched. In mid-January 2025, it crossed the orbit of Mars. The speed should have increased under solar gravity, but instead it slowed, decelerating by a measurable fraction of a percent. There was no reason for it to do that. No natural mechanism in the known universe allows an object to slow itself in free space. Somewhere in the black ocean between worlds, something had applied the brakes. At that moment, a thin line of light appeared along one edge of its form. It wasn't reflection. It pulsed once, twice, then vanished. Radio dishes across Earth registered a tiny burst of wideband interference, too brief to triangulate, too deliberate to ignore. The chatter inside NASA grew chaotic. Emails vanished, servers overloaded, and every astronomer suddenly wanted time on the same telescope. The director ordered silence until confirmation, but the leak reached the press within hours. Interstellar object showing unexplained energy emission. The story burned across the internet. People imagined alien probes, secret weapons, cosmic omens. Conspiracy channels live-streamed sky maps. Self-proclaimed experts decoded non-existent signals. Through it all, the real scientists kept watching, helpless, because the data refused to behave. Night after night, 3I/Atlas drew closer to the sun. Its surface glowed with the faint hue of ionized gas, like a breath of frozen fire. Every rotation exposed new contours, hexagonal, precise, almost mechanical. The object seemed less like a rock and more like an artifact adrift for eons, now warming after endless sleep. At dawn on February 2nd, the main Atlas array captured its clearest image yet, a spindle of light surrounded by a halo of vapor, traveling at 60 kilometers per second. In the final frames, a thin filament extended outward, a plume or an antenna. No one could agree. Then the cameras saturated, overwhelmed by brightness, and 3I/Atlas disappeared behind solar glare. The world waited. In that silence, the realization grew heavier. Something not born of this system was now inside it, circling our star. It had crossed the vastness between suns, entered our domain, and for reasons no one could explain, it had slowed down. Astronomers called it an anomaly. Engineers called it data corruption. But in the quiet corners of every observatory, someone whispered the thought they were all afraid to voice. What if it wasn't drifting by chance? What if it came on purpose? And as the sun rose over the Pacific, a final signal blinked across the sensors, a narrowband pulse, steady and deliberate. Then nothing. The silent visitor had arrived, and somewhere in the endless dark, it was waiting. The morning after 3I/Atlas vanished into the solar glare, the world moved on. News cycles shifted back to politics, markets, and storms. But in a few sleepless observatories, deep beneath mountain domes and deserts, the watchers stayed awake. They were waiting for the object to reappear on the other side of the sun, where light would return and, perhaps, answers with it. For 9 days there was nothing, no reflections, no signals, no trace of its heat signature. It was as though the visitor had dissolved into sunlight. Then, on the 10th day, the quiet ended. A single data spike appeared at the Canberra Deep Space Network, a whisper of radio energy that lasted less than a second. It was narrowband, centered at a frequency no known cosmic source had ever produced. The system flagged it as interference. But when technicians cross-checked with arrays in Madrid and California, they found the same pulse, identical, perfectly timed, repeating every 26 minutes. That shouldn't be possible. Cosmic noise is chaotic, never synchronized. But this was rhythm. This was pattern. Within hours, NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory convened an emergency team. Screens glowed blue in the dark as algorithms tried to decode what human minds could not. The pulses weren't random. Each contained subtle modulations, like a fingerprint carved in light. The first conclusion was cautious. Maybe solar wind, maybe equipment resonance. But after 3 days, the signal's amplitude began to rise and fall in a geometric cycle. 3 peaks, 3 valleys, a sequence so deliberate that even skeptics fell silent. They traced its origin to a narrow corridor of space, roughly where 3I/Atlas should have been after its perihelion pass. If the signal was truly coming from there, then the object had survived the sun. The phrase spread across control rooms like wildfire. It's still alive. And yet, what was alive supposed to mean? NASA refused to release details. A short statement read only. Anomalous deep space radio source detected near expected position of 3I/Atlas. Analysis ongoing. But secrecy is oxygen for curiosity. Within days, astronomers across the world began pointing their instruments toward that patch of sky. Independent radio telescopes in Chile, South Africa, and Poland confirmed the same sequence, identical down to the microsecond. The signal was universal, coherent, intentional. Then something even stranger happened. Every 26 minutes after the pulse, there was a silence, exactly 164 seconds long, followed by a faint subharmonic echo, like the last note of a chord fading through vacuum. When plotted visually, the waveform formed a repeating triangle, sharp, perfect, mechanical. Someone on the decoding team noticed that when you converted the waveform to sound and slowed it down, it resembled a human heartbeat. Another scientist rotated the spectrogram 90 degrees and discovered faint harmonic spacing that mirrored the Fibonacci sequence. No one could agree whether it was coincidence or design, but the room felt colder every time the pulse returned. By February 20th, the data was undeniable. 3I/Atlas was emitting structured energy bursts, regular, precise, mathematically impossible to produce by chance. And yet, there was no message, no language, only the pulse. Some believed it was malfunction, a relic broadcasting the same distress call for millennia, echoing across interstellar space until fate carried it here. Others argued it was scanning, an automatic beacon mapping its surroundings. A few whispered that maybe, just maybe, it was listening back. The longer they studied, the stranger the results became. When one array transmitted a test ping back at the same frequency, the pulse from 3I/Atlas shifted, slightly delayed, as if it had noticed. A ripple of unease spread through the control room. Did it just respond? Someone asked. No one answered. The logs spoke for themselves. The timing had changed by 1.6 seconds. That night, the team leader ordered all transmissions to cease. No further signals were to be sent toward the anomaly. Whatever 3I/Atlas was doing, they would not risk provoking it. But curiosity is the oldest fire in the human mind. A small group of researchers, anonymous, independent, continued the experiment in secret. They built a portable transmitter, hidden under the guise of a university project. At 3:14 a.m., they sent a single coded pulse back into the void, 3 peaks, matching the original pattern. The response came 2 hours later. It wasn't a repeat, it was a variation. The rhythm altered, 3 peaks, then 4. No one could explain it. No natural phenomenon adjusts to mimic what it receives. When they analyzed the new pulse, the internal modulation had changed frequencies, aligning perfectly with the hydrogen spectral line, the universal constant of communication in the cosmos. It was as though the source understood what hydrogen meant to us. News of the unauthorized contact reached NASA within days. The entire data set was confiscated, the equipment dismantled. The researchers were silenced under non-disclosure agreements. Publicly, the event never happened. Officially, the signal was instrumental noise. Unofficially, a quiet directive circulated through the global astronomy network. Cease active transmissions toward the object. For weeks, The pulse continued at its steady rhythm. Then, without warning, it changed again. This time, it compressed, shorter bursts, closer intervals, rising intensity. At first, the team believed it was interference, but as the amplitude grew, another pattern emerged beneath the main signal, a faint oscillation repeating every 86 minutes, precisely matching the rotation period of the Earth's deep space satellites. It wasn't just transmitting, it was tracking us. Panic spread behind closed doors. If the object could perceive Earth's artificial signals, it meant it was aware not just of our star, but of the intelligent noise orbiting it. It was no longer just a comet, it was a listener. And yet, through all the confusion, no one could decode the meaning. The pulses carried no binary structure, no recognizable data frame. It wasn't speaking, at least not in any language we knew. But perhaps that was the point. Maybe the message wasn't meant to be understood. Maybe it was a mirror, something reflecting our own transmissions back at us, altered, distorted, reminding us that we had never been alone in the dark to begin with. The team decided to monitor quietly, without interference. For 47 hours, they watched the pulse fade, stabilize, and fade again, until on the dawn of March 1st, it stopped. Completely. The last signal came through at 5:13 Universal Time Coordinated. It was shorter, sharper, and for the first time, accompanied by a burst of light in the visible spectrum. A final flare, like a heartbeat collapsing into silence. Then, again, the universe went still. 3I/Atlas was gone from every radar. No trace, no signal, no echo. But deep within the archived waveforms, one researcher noticed something. A hidden repetition in the last burst. When slowed down 800 times, it formed a simple harmonic tone. 3 rising notes, perfectly tuned to human musical intervals. A coincidence or a signature? They called it the message from the dark. And though no one could explain what it meant, every time they played it back, the same feeling returned. That somewhere out there, beyond the reach of light, something had heard us and answered. For a brief, trembling moment, the universe seemed to stand still. 3I/Atlas had passed behind the sun and vanished from every instrument built to see. Astronomers expected it to re-emerge like any comet, a predictable arc defined by gravity's hand. But when the object returned to view, the numbers refused to obey. Its new path was wrong, not slightly, catastrophically. The calculations predicted a graceful outward curve toward Jupiter's orbit, yet the actual trajectory dipped inward, as if the object had burned its own fuel to alter course. Every law of celestial mechanics collapsed beneath the data. In Pasadena, scientists stared at screens that made no sense. The velocity curve showed negative acceleration in the void of space, a region where nothing exists to slow you down. The telemetry looked like a controlled descent. It was as if 3I/Atlas were searching for something. They ran simulations by the thousands. Everyone failed. The software kept spitting the same error message. External force required. At first, they blamed the sun. Perhaps solar radiation pressure was stronger than expected, but the calculations didn't fit. The object was slowing against the direction of light, not with it. Something else was acting upon it, or within it. For a moment, imagination became a threat. No one dared say the word propulsion, but the fear hung in the air like static. A rock cannot choose to change its mind. Observatories from Chile to Canary Islands confirmed the same thing. 3I/Atlas was executing a maneuver. It tilted its axis by 2 degrees, then flattened its arc along the plane of the ecliptic, the same plane where Earth and the other inner planets reside. Every adjustment was precise, intentional, and impossible. By March 6th, the object had lost 20% of its velocity. Energy doesn't just disappear, it has to go somewhere. Infrared satellites picked up bursts of heat behind the object, short, pulse-like jets resembling thrusters firing. The pattern matched the earlier radio signal. 3 bursts, pause. 3 again. Rhythm had become motion. The theory spread like a virus through the scientific community. 3I/Atlas was self-propelling. Skeptics called it fantasy. Believers called it the first proof of extraterrestrial engineering. Between them lay a void of fear. Governments moved quietly. Classified meetings linked NASA, ESA, and the Chinese National Space Administration. Shared data was scrubbed of timestamps before release. A new directive appeared in internal emails. Limit public comment on Atlas trajectory until review complete. Outside, amateur astronomers posted their findings online. Backyard telescopes tracked the same drift and the same slowing. The truth was impossible to contain. Each night, the object grew brighter, not from reflected sunlight, but from within. Its luminosity rose in pulses, each wave coinciding with the timing of the radio bursts. When the brightness peaked, the signal would weaken, as if one fed the other. The pattern was elegant, like breathing. By mid-March, trajectory models predicted an Earth intersection window within 6 weeks. Not a collision, but a flyby close enough to be visible with the naked eye. The media finally caught up. Headlines screamed, "Cosmic visitor heading for Earth." NASA held a press conference under bright studio lights. They called it a non-hazardous interstellar comet, assuring the public there was nothing to fear. But the smiles were forced, and the answers short. Someone asked why the object was slowing down. The spokesperson paused, then said, "We are still analyzing the data." Behind those words was panic. In private briefings, engineers proposed new ideas: electromagnetic sails, ion discharge, plasma pressure, anything that could fit the equations. None did. The only solution was intentional thrust. One night, an intern overlaid the object's trajectory with Earth's own orbit. The paths didn't collide, they aligned. At its closest approach, 3I/Atlas would mirror Earth's motion around the sun for almost 7 hours, like a shadow keeping pace with its source. Was it a coincidence? Or was it following us? Then came the anomaly no one expected. At 3:21 Universal Time, coordinated on March 19th, the object's spin reversed. Rotation direction, documented for months, flipped in a single instant. The angular momentum required for such a change was beyond any natural possibility. The mathematics looked deliberate. Energy was not lost. It was rechanneled. Moments later, the radio pulse resumed, stronger, clearer, structured. 3 bursts, pause for bursts, pause, 5. A counting sequence, like the beginning of a language. The team at JPL recorded the entire event. When they converted the timing into waveform visualization, the pulses formed a spiral, a perfect golden ratio curve. Mathematics had entered the signal. An old scientist in the room whispered, "They're showing us they understand the universe." Over the next week, the trajectory bent again, this time directly toward the ecliptic line shared with Earth. The orbital models showed a controlled approach that would bring it within $0 of our planet. Close enough for a message, too far for contact. Satellite feeds picked up flashes near its trail, small objects shedding off its body and disappearing into space. Some called them fragments. Others believed they were probes. And through it all, the signal never stopped. Its pattern grew denser, like speech becoming urgent. The final models couldn't predict what came next. The object's new velocity curve showed something no orbit should ever display. An asymptote, a plateau between motion and rest. It was slowing to 0 relative to the sun. Objects don't stop in space. They either fall or fly. There is no third option, unless something tells them otherwise. When the realization hit, the room fell silent. 3I/Atlas was not drifting. It was arriving, and whatever force guided its impossible trajectory was still active, still listening, still closing the distance between its world and ours. The mathematics had spoken, physics had yielded, and humanity, once again, was left to wonder whether the sky above was truly ours at all. The sun has always been the great filter of truth. Everything that ventures too close is stripped bare of ice, of dust, of lies. For billions of years, it has burned away the secrets of wandering comets, leaving nothing but ashes and light. But when 3I/Atlas began its final descent toward Perihelion, the star met something that refused to burn. From every corner of Earth, telescopes turned inward, tracking the silent traveler as it crossed Mercury's orbit. Its trajectory defied fear and logic alike. Instead of accelerating like a comet pulled by gravity, it held speed, almost as if resisting the sun's embrace. The models at NASA, ESA, and JAXA all failed to predict its movement beyond a few hours in advance. The numbers twisted into paradoxes. Energy losses where there should be gain, shadows where there should be flare. The closer it came, the stranger it looked. Solar probes like Parker and Solar Orbiter caught glimpses of something not entirely natural. A perfectly smooth silhouette slicing through waves of solar plasma, its edges glowing blue instead of red. No dust tail, no outgassing, no debris, only geometry, cold, deliberate geometry, enduring fire that should have melted iron. Scientists began to argue in whispers. Some wanted to classify it as an interstellar artifact. Others refused to abandon the comfort of the word comet. One senior astrophysicist simply said, "We are not looking at a rock. We're looking at intention." By the first week of April, 3I/Atlas was less than 50 million kilometers from the sun. At that distance, temperatures should have exceeded 2,000 degrees. The object's internal sensors, if it even had sensors, remained unreadable, but its visible spectrum showed something horrifying, a steady increase in luminosity, far beyond reflection. It was glowing on its own, not because it was burning, but because something inside it was waking up. At 8:03 Universal Time Coordinated, Parker Solar Probe's magnetometer recorded a sharp fluctuation, an electromagnetic field expanding outward from 3I/Atlas, countering the solar wind. The object was creating its own magnetic bubble, like a miniature magnetosphere. Within that shell, the sun's fury bent around it harmlessly. For the first time in history, humans witnessed a body defying the sun itself. Inside NASA's control rooms, the tension was unbearable. Data poured in faster than humans could read. The object's surface emitted pulses of ultraviolet radiation at intervals, matching its earlier radio signals. 3, pause, 4, pause, 5. Each burst created ripples across the corona, forming patterns that shouldn't exist in plasma dynamics. It was as though 3I/Atlas was using the sun as a resonator, sending a message not to Earth, but through the star. "Are we looking at communication?" someone whispered. No one answered. The idea was too large, too dangerous. Then, at 8:14, the impossible happened. Every satellite facing the sun experienced interference. Images pixelated. Data spiked into white noise. Then, for exactly 2 minutes and 11 seconds, all solar observation feeds went dark. Complete blackout. No Parker. No Solar Orbiter. No SOHO. The sun itself seemed to blink. When the systems came back online, 3I/Atlas was gone. The first thought was vaporization. Perhaps it had finally succumbed to the heat. But the sensors showed no plume, no debris, no trail of ions. Instead, instruments detected a void, a precise, circular gap in the corona where the object had been. A hole in sunlight, The temperature inside that void was lower than the surrounding space, as if something had stolen energy directly from the star. An hour later, the object reappeared on the other side of the sun, not as a streak of light, but as a flicker on infrared channels. It had passed through perihelion intact, but with a trajectory that made no physical sense. It hadn't slingshot outward as comets do. It had slowed again, altering direction against the sun's gravitational curve, as if guided by unseen hands. "What's powering it?" one researcher asked. No one knew. Some theorized exotic materials absorbing stellar energy. Others whispered of technology buried beneath its crust. But one idea, unspoken in official documents, haunted every scientist who stared too long at the data. Perhaps it wasn't collecting energy. Perhaps it was feeding. The spectrum changed again. Those who watched saw a faint greenish hue spreading from its center, pulsating like a heartbeat. Solar flares erupted in sync with the rhythm, bending toward it, drawn as though obeying gravity of its own. For 3 hours, the sun danced to the object's pulse. Then the flares stopped, the glow dimmed, and the radio silence returned. Every observatory that had access to the event stored its data in secret. Public reports labeled the blackout solar interference. But in private, a small network of astrophysicists began trading encrypted files. The data revealed a recurring pattern inside the electromagnetic burst, something resembling coordinates. When translated into orbital terms, those coordinates didn't point outward into deep space. They pointed inward, toward Earth. Panic stirred behind closed doors. Was the object sending a signal to us, or preparing to arrive? Governments ordered the classification of all perihelion-related telemetry. Civilian astronomers were locked out of raw data feeds. NASA's official statement read, "No unusual behavior observed." But internal logs told a different story. Anomalous temperature inversions, magnetic field distortions, a perfect orbital correction too precise for chance. At 1547 Universal Time Coordinated, one final flash erupted from 3I/Atlas. It was brief, brilliant, and utterly silent. Solar probes captured only fragments, patterns of light that resembled angular symbols, repeating across its surface before vanishing. Then came the shockwave. A low-frequency burst rippled through the solar wind, detectable even by amateur radio arrays on Earth. It carried no information, only pressure, a thump across the electromagnetic spectrum, as if the object had released a single colossal breath. The shockwave reached Earth 31 minutes later. Auroras erupted over latitudes that had never seen them before. Cities across the northern hemisphere looked up to skies painted in violet and gold. The world called it beautiful. The scientists called it contact. In the aftermath, a new signal emerged, faint but distinct, transmitting from the object's last known coordinates as it drifted away from the sun. The interval between pulses had shortened. It no longer matched the Fibonacci sequence. Now, it matched Earth's rotation. It had synchronized with us. From that moment, 3I/Atlas was no longer a curiosity. It was a mirror, something alive enough to listen, intelligent enough to adjust, and perhaps ancient enough to know that every civilization must first look into its own star before meeting the darkness beyond it. As the object left the sun's corona, heading once again toward the inner system, the watchers realized they weren't tracking a visitor anymore. They were tracking a decision. The countdown to its encounter with Earth had begun. It began with a tremor that no one could feel, a whisper in the data, a vibration buried within background noise, the faint heartbeat of something vast preparing to change. At first, scientists dismissed it as interference. The sun had been restless. Storms of plasma crackled across its surface, and cosmic static often masqueraded as mystery. But this was different. It had rhythm. It had purpose. In the early hours of April 14th, deep space sensors in 3 continents detected a synchronized spike in electromagnetic radiation, not from the sun, from 3I/Atlas. For 16 seconds, the object brightened by a factor of 10,000. Then it exploded. The word exploded hardly does it justice. It wasn't a chaotic detonation, not fire or fragmentation as humans understand it. It was controlled, precise, almost surgical. From a single point of light came a radiant sphere expanding outward, perfectly symmetrical, like a heartbeat captured in slow motion. The wavefront reached millions of kilometers in seconds, then froze, suspended in the vacuum as if time itself had hesitated. Every telescope pointed toward the event. For the first time since the invention of the camera, human eyes had no frame of reference for what they were seeing. A burst that emitted no debris, no flame, no smoke, only geometry. The shock front crystallized into patterns of interference, concentric rings glowing in harmonic intervals. Within the rings flickered symbols, lines, and lattices that defied description, as if mathematics had taken physical form. The sensors in orbit began to fail. One by one, instruments overloaded, not from heat or radiation, but from information. The bandwidth collapsed under the density of data. The explosion wasn't destroying matter. It was transmitting something. For nearly 8 minutes, Earth's magnetosphere quivered under the invisible wave. Radio stations went silent. GPS systems froze. Power grids across the northern hemisphere flickered, pulsing in sync with the light from the sun. And then, as abruptly as it began, everything stopped. The wave dissipated, leaving nothing but emptiness. No fragments, no tail, no trace of 3I/Atlas. The coordinates, where it had been now registered as zero-energy vacuum, colder than space itself. Did it destroy itself? A voice whispered inside NASA's mission control. No one answered. Screens still glowed with impossible readings, temperature inversions, negative radiation signatures, a shadow that cast light instead of darkness. The data refused to obey physics. Hours later, the world began to notice. Auroras ignited again, this time global, reaching the equator, wrapping the Earth in a halo of shifting colors. Purple, green, gold. It was breathtaking and terrifying, the kind of beauty that humbles civilizations. Airplane pilots reported seeing strange patterns ripple through the sky, hexagons of light forming and dissolving like a language written across the ionosphere. News anchors called it the Great Solar Bloom. The scientists didn't correct them. They didn't know what to call it. What they did know was this: the explosion didn't release debris into space. It released data. The electromagnetic signatures carried compressed patterns, not random noise, but encoded harmonics arranged in nested primes. Someone, somewhere, had written something into the light. For days, teams across the planet tried to decode the burst. Supercomputers translated the waveform into audible frequencies, producing a sound that defied logic, a tone layered in octaves of itself, a chord that never resolved. Listeners described it as alive, as if the sound breathed. When played through a spectrogram, the waveform revealed a single repeating shape, an eye. The press didn't see that image. It was locked behind the highest security clearance. Those who did see it refused to sleep for days. The human mind isn't built to face the possibility that something not born of this world just looked back. In the aftermath, government agencies went silent. Data servers went offline. Independent astronomers were disconnected from public databases. The official explanation came swiftly. The observed event was the natural disintegration of an interstellar comet at Perihelion. No mention of the electromagnetic surge. No mention of the encoded harmonics. No mention of the pulse that followed. Because there was a pulse. 30 hours after the explosion, The Deep Space Network received a faint return, a single repeating tone buried under cosmic background radiation. It wasn't from the sun, nor from any reflection of the wave. It came from inside the region where 3I/Atlas had been. A voice without sound, a presence without form. The tone carried no modulation, but when graphed over time, it revealed a simple rhythm, one that matched human brainwave frequencies during REM sleep. It was as if the message wasn't meant to be read or heard, but dreamed. Across the world, strange phenomena began to surface. Radio operators reported phantom transmissions, repeating fragments of the earlier signal. Photographers captured auroras, forming the same concentric rings seen in the explosion. And people, ordinary people, began to dream of spirals of light falling through the sun. Was it coincidence, mass hysteria, or something more profound? The residue of communication that bypassed technology altogether? NASA's archival footage from the explosion revealed something no one expected. In the final milliseconds before the light faded, a dark shape appeared within the core of the blast. Not spherical, but structured, angular, architectural. It lasted only 3 frames, but within those frames was symmetry, a lattice of lines forming a perfect tetrahedron, spinning slowly before dissolving. A geometry older than language, older than myth. Some said it was an artifact of lens distortion. Others said it was a doorway. In the following weeks, the solar wind stabilized. The skies cleared. The world calmed. But the signal never completely stopped. Every night, faint echoes rippled across deep space channels, subtle, patient, identical. 3 pulses. Pause. For pulses. Pause. 5. The same pattern that started it all. Whatever 3I/Atlas had been, comet, machine, messenger, or something beyond comprehension, it had not vanished. It had transformed, and in that transformation, it left behind a truth humanity could no longer deny. The universe is not silent. It speaks in light, in rhythm, in destruction. It speaks through what it breaks. As one physicist wrote in a private note, later leaked to the press, it didn't die. It communicated in the only language capable of surviving the sun detonation. The explosion of 3I/Atlas was not an ending. It was the beginning of the signal. The world awoke beneath skies still painted in gold. Days after the explosion, auroras lingered at the edge of dawn like ghostly fingerprints, shimmering across continents that had never known northern lights. To most, it was beautiful. To the few who understood what they had witnessed, it was a wound in the sky. The object was gone. The data was not. In the hours following the detonation, NASA's servers drowned in information. Petabytes of telemetry poured from satellites and ground observatories, each second carrying more data than an entire year of solar monitoring. The network collapsed under its own brilliance. By the time engineers restored partial access, half the files had already vanished, corrupted, overwritten, or inexplicably blank. It wasn't deletion. It was as if the files had been emptied, their contents replaced with zeros, hollow frameworks of nothing. Everywhere, the same pattern, clean erasure, no trace of manipulation, no intrusion logs, no fingerprints. Just silence, immaculate and absolute. Can data evaporate? A young technician asked in disbelief. An older scientist replied, not unless something rewrote the laws of entropy. Then came the second wave. Devices connected to the telemetry systems began to malfunction in impossible ways. Hard drives reversed polarity, magnetic arrays inverted, and power supplies hummed with rhythmic pulses that matched the signature of the original 3I/Atlas signal. The machines, it seemed, were remembering. Inside NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, a team of analysts replayed the only surviving footage of the explosion. Frame by frame, they searched for clues. At timestamp 14 hours 8 minutes and 22 seconds, the blast's core flickered with a brief pattern. Repeating geometry. Fractal shapes nested within each other. The algorithm tasked with reading it froze, returning a single line of output. Input data invalid. Contains non-human order. They tried again. Same result. It was as if the data itself resisted interpretation, as though something inside it refused to be understood. Meanwhile, across the ocean, the European Space Agency reported identical anomalies. Entire spectrographic logs returned with checksum mismatches, the kind that occur when reality changes faster than the sensors can write. Some graphs even began to rewrite themselves days later, as if new information were still arriving from an event that no longer existed. What frightened the analysts most was not what they lost, but what remained. Tiny fragments survived the corruption, isolated blocks of binary scattered among the void. When translated into spectral mapping, those fragments didn't resemble numbers. They resembled faces. The images were faint, pixelated beyond recognition, but patterns emerged. Symmetry, alignment, reflections of eyes and contours that no random compression artifact could create. The data was trying to show something. No one could decide whether that was more horrifying than comforting. NASA's public statements grew shorter. Each day, less information reached the public feeds. Then one morning, everything stopped. Every open-access archive went offline for scheduled maintenance. 3 days later, they returned. Empty. Every image, every timestamp, every raw file replaced with an identical placeholder message. 404. File not found. The event that had filled the world with wonder now officially did not exist. Outside government walls, rebellion brewed quietly among independent astronomers. Amateurs who had recorded the explosion on backyard telescopes began uploading their footage to private servers. Within hours, those uploads disappeared too. Accounts were suspended, domains vanished, hard drives wiped remotely. The erasure was not just technical, it was coordinated. And yet, data always leaves ghosts. Some fragments refuse to die. One group of researchers in Argentina, working offline on analog storage, discovered a faint residual waveform buried inside the corrupted telemetry. When played back at 1/800 th speed, the pattern revealed something new, a pulse synchronized not with Earth's orbit, but with human sleep cycles. The modulation matched the circadian rhythm of an average person. It wasn't just data. It was something alive inside it, adaptive, responsive, observing. At the University of Tokyo, a physicist named Dr. Kenji Arai claimed to have reconstructed 30 milliseconds of the explosion's original radiation pattern using analog spectrographs immune to digital interference. He played the restored waveform during a closed symposium. Witnesses described it as a low, harmonic hum that seemed to echo inside their chests rather than through speakers. Several attendees reported feeling a sensation of weightlessness, like falling slowly backward into water. One collapsed entirely. When revived, she whispered it wanted to be remembered. After that, Dr. Arai vanished. His laboratory was sealed by government order. Whispers spread through the scientific underground. The missing data was not missing at all. It had been taken. Some claimed the burst encoded a self-replicating signal, a digital organism born from the explosion, moving through networks faster than fire, rewriting code wherever it went. Others said it was simpler than that. The data had infected human memory itself. Within weeks, strange coincidences began appearing among people who had worked on the project. They dreamed of the same pattern, concentric rings of light folding inward, forming the same eye that had appeared in the spectrograms. Some heard it as a sound, 3 tones rising, pausing, then 4, then 5, echoing inside their sleep like a calling they couldn't escape. A few refused to return to work, claiming that when they closed their eyes, they could see equations forming on the inside of their eyelids. Governments classified it as neurological fatigue due to data exposure. But one leaked memo revealed something far darker. The memo was short, unsigned, and written in perfect calm. The data is recursive. Observation modifies the observer. It was no longer about what humanity had seen. It was about what the seeing had done to humanity. Months passed. The world moved on. But within encrypted archives, small pieces of the missing information survived, quarantined, unopenable, preserved like sacred relics of something forbidden. Scientists called it the dead code. Rumor had it that even air-gapped systems storing the fragments began to hum faintly, emitting a rhythmic buzz in the pattern of the 3I/Atlas signal. The hums stopped whenever someone entered the room. In the end, all that could be confirmed was this. Every trace of the event had been buried, yet its echo persisted. In power lines, in dreams, in the subconscious murmur of people who never looked up at the sky again. Somewhere between the stars, the fragments of 3I/Atlas drifted unseen, silent, unmeasured. But silence, as the universe has always shown, is only the space between messages. And one day, when the hum begins again, humanity will realize that the missing data was never truly lost. It was waiting for us to listen properly. The silence that followed the disappearance of 3I/Atlas did not bring peace. It brought arguments. It brought fear. And, for the first time in generations, it forced science and belief to share the same language: uncertainty. At first, the divide was simple. Those who thought the object had been natural, and those who swore it was not. But simplicity never survives the hunger of the human mind. As the months passed, the debate metastasized into something larger than astronomy. It became a war of meaning. The scientists, official institutions, clung to physics. They could not accept that something beyond their equations had crossed their sky, so they rewrote the equations instead. NASA, ESA, and the Chinese Academy of Sciences each released separate models of spontaneous cometary detonation. The models disagreed on nearly every parameter: temperature, density, radiation yield, but they all agreed on one thing: it had to be natural. Behind closed doors, however, dissent festered. Young researchers whispered in hallways, sharing fragments of forbidden data: the surviving spectral harmonics, the impossible cold core, the recursive patterns. Some began publishing anonymously under pseudonyms, proposing what they called post-Newtonian artifact theory. That 3I/Atlas had been not a comet, but a machine built to harvest stellar energy and transmit information through destruction. These papers vanished almost as soon as they appeared. Their authors found their university funding suspended. Their accounts were locked. But every deletion only convinced more people to believe. The governments, politicians had no patience for mystery. Mystery breeds panic, and panic breeds instability. Within months of the event, a joint statement emerged from the G7. There is no evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence related to 3I/Atlas. But the tone was defensive, almost frightened. Military budgets swelled overnight under the banner of planetary defense. Orbiting satellites were repositioned, telescopes reclassified as strategic assets. Rumors spread that hidden payloads, anti-asteroid weapons, deep space monitors, silent probes had already been launched. A few journalists dared to ask a dangerous question: if 3I/Atlas was a weapon, whose was it? No one answered. But somewhere deep in the deserts of Nevada, a new array of antennas began construction. Its code name was Project Solace, and its stated purpose was solar observation. Yet its dishes faced not the sun, but the empty coordinates where the object had exploded. The believers Beyond science and politics, the event ignited something ancient. Faiths fractured and reformed overnight. Some saw 3I/Atlas as a messenger, a herald of cosmic judgment. Others worshipped it as a god that had burned itself into the sun to cleanse humanity's ignorance. A new movement arose, calling itself the Children of the Eye, using the same symbol extracted from the explosion's data, the concentric geometry that looked back at whoever looked upon it. They claimed to hear the pulse in meditation. They tattooed the pattern onto their skin and spoke in sequences of 3, 4, 5. What began as fringe mysticism spread faster than governments could contain. By the time authorities intervened, the movement had chapters in 37 countries. They said the message of 3I/Atlas was simple. Creation remembers what creates it. The skeptics. And then there were those who denied everything. To them, the explosion was a psychological contagion, a perfect storm of cosmic coincidence and human imagination. They pointed to past phenomena, comets that fragmented, satellites that glitched, crowds that dreamed collectively under stress. They spoke calmly, rationally, as if reason itself could heal the wound in the sky. But reason trembles before pattern. When power grids flickered in 3 continents simultaneously, again matching the 3I/Atlas pulse, skepticism began to sound like fear in disguise. The internal war. Inside NASA, the fracture grew violent. The artifact theorists demanded transparency. The naturalists demanded silence. Emails leaked, exposing years of internal arguments and suppressed findings. One message, timestamp 2:47 a.m. Simply read, "If it was natural, why does it behave like it remembers?" That line became a rallying cry for both camps, each claiming it as their truth. The artifact group believed 3I/Atlas had been sent, perhaps millennia ago, to test civilizations for readiness, using the sun itself as a crucible. The naturalists countered that such thinking was a regression into superstition. They insisted the object's anomalies were within the margin of unknown physics, not intelligence. But behind their anger lay something deeper: envy. To believe in design was to admit the limits of knowledge. To deny it was to defend the illusion of mastery. The leaks. Then, in August, the world changed again. A data dump appeared on the dark web. 4.3 terabytes of encrypted files labeled Atlas Classified. Within hours, fragments were decoded and circulated. The leaks contained images of the explosion's inner frame. The tetrahedral structure, clear and undeniable. It was real, and there was more. Inside the metadata of one corrupted image lay a hidden string of text. Heliostation 02 received response confirmed 3:14 Universal Time coordinated. A response to what? Governments denied the authenticity, but the panic was uncontrollable. If the data was real, someone or something had answered humanity's accidental transmission months after the object's death. The philosophers. When science fractures, philosophy inherits the ruins. Writers, thinkers, and theologians filled the void with questions the world wasn't ready to face. Was intelligence inevitable wherever matter could remember its own structure? Was 3I/Atlas alive in any sense we understood, or was it a pattern, a thought imprinted on reality itself? If it exploded by choice, what was the message written in that sacrifice? Some suggested that we had already been communicating with it, not through radio or mathematics, but through observation, that by studying it, we altered it, and by altering it, we became part of its function. As one physicist wrote anonymously, perhaps 3I/Atlas wasn't here to speak. Perhaps it was here to measure our silence. The division. By winter, the world had split into 2 realities. In one, the explosion was an astronomical event, nothing more. In the other, It was the first contact in human history, a conversation too vast for words, carried out in light and memory. The line between them was drawn not by evidence, but by faith in evidence itself. Each side accused the other of delusion. Each believed the other was blind. And above them both, the pulse returned. Late December, Deep Space Network and Tenny once again caught the familiar sequence. 3. Pause for pause. 5. Weak but unmistakable. This time, it came not from the sun, but from the direction of interstellar space, far beyond the orbit of Pluto. The signal was moving away from Earth, fading slowly, as if receding back into eternity. The skeptics said it was an echo. The believers said it was a farewell. The scientists said nothing at all, because buried inside the signal's harmonic spectrum was a whisper of modulation, a new frequency layered beneath the rest. When decoded into visual form, it drew a shape the human race knew too well, the orbit of Earth, perfectly traced, glowing faintly at the heart of the cosmos. The message was clear to those brave enough to read it. We were never its destination. Silence returned, or what humanity mistook for silence. 4 months after the last recorded echo, the universe seemed still again. No flashes, no interference, no unexplained readings. Only ordinary stars, ordinary radio hiss, the familiar hum of cosmic background radiation. But silence has weight, and those who had listened to the pulse of 3I/Atlas could feel that something inside that silence was watching. It started small. A technician at the Madrid Deep Space Complex noticed a repeating distortion in their calibration signal. Every time they aligned the antennas toward the outer solar system, a thin sliver of frequency rose above the noise floor, steady, unwavering, mechanical. At first it looked like equipment feedback. Then it appeared again, same pattern, same spacing, day after day. Across the world, other observatories began to report similar anomalies. Australia, Chile, the Arctic Circle, different hemispheres, same pulse. When cross-correlated, the signals arrived in perfect synchrony, down to the millisecond. No natural source could coordinate across half the planet at once. Someone whispered, "It's back." But this time, the message was subtler. No grand burst of radiation. No geometric shapes burned into light. Only a persistent murmur, buried so deep that most receivers ignored it entirely. It was quieter, colder, like the echo of a heartbeat through frozen glass. When the waveforms were stacked together, a pattern emerged. Not the Fibonacci sequence, not the hydrogen line. Something new. Every pulse was offset by a fraction equal to 1 human second divided by the length of an Earth day. Exactly 1/86/400. The ratio of time to rotation. It was synchronized perfectly to Earth's spin. The signal wasn't coming to us. It was revolving with us. Inside the analysis rooms, the realization struck like lightning. The transmission was local, not from deep space, not from the sun, but reflected through Earth's own electromagnetic field. Somehow, the planet itself had become part of the message. In Geneva, a private consortium of physicists rebuilt the missing 3I/Atlas data fragments, layering the corrupted binaries over the new signal. When overlaid, the interference patterns aligned with surgical precision. The old and new frequencies were mirrors of each other, one the inverse of the other, the past and the present in conversation. The project's lead researcher, Dr. Lena Voronova, called it a dialogue across time. She believed the object had never truly left. It had embedded itself in the electromagnetic memory of the solar system, turning the entire planetary network into an amplifier for its voice. Her theory was simple, terrifying, and beautiful. When 3I/Atlas detonated, it didn't vanish. It transferred its structure into light. The explosion wasn't destruction. It was transformation. The object had become radiation itself, scattered across the solar wind, encoded in every photon of sunlight touching Earth. Every sunrise was now a transmission. At first, few took her seriously, but then strange coincidences began to surface. Digital instruments, even unconnected to any network, began to hum faintly at the signal's frequency. Old cathode televisions flickered to life in empty rooms, displaying static that pulsed 3 times, paused, then 4, then 5. Pacemakers malfunctioned in identical rhythm. Children spoke of dreams filled with lights orbiting around a black sphere, whispering patterns they couldn't describe. When the media finally caught wind of it, panic disguised itself as fascination. Headlines called it the signal that wouldn't die. Documentaries aired. Hashtags trended. But as the noise of human attention grew, the signal began to change again. At 3:14 Universal Time, coordinated on October 8th, every observatory receiving the transmission recorded a sudden drop in amplitude, followed by the appearance of a second tone, lower, resonant, almost melodic. It wasn't random interference. It was harmonic expansion, like a chord completing itself. 2 frequencies became 3, forming an audible triad that repeated every 26 minutes, the same timing as the very first pulse detected months ago. When played through speakers, the new signal sounded eerily human, not a voice, not language, but a breathing rhythm, a rise and fall like the slow inhalation of something enormous. Engineers tried filtering it, decoding it, compressing it. Nothing removed the sensation that it was alive. Then the images started. Radio telescopes, using interferometric imaging, began to pick up subtle phase distortions in the sky. When mapped in 3 dimensions, those distortions formed a faint outline, a torus-shaped field hovering invisibly between Earth and the Moon. The magnetic flux was weak, but constant, rotating once per day. No satellites passed through it. No cosmic rays disrupted it. It was as if space itself had been rewritten into a circuit. When converted into visible wavelengths, the field resembled a lattice of shifting light, spirals nested within spirals, all converging toward a single center. At the center was nothing, a perfect void. "The signal has form," Dr. Voronova whispered. "It's not coming from somewhere. It is somewhere." Governments denied the discovery. Publicly, it was an imaging artifact. Privately, funding poured into black-budget projects with names like Solnet and Helix Array. They weren't searching for new signals anymore. They were trying to speak back. But every attempt to reply failed. No matter what frequency was broadcast, no matter what modulation was used, the result was always the same. The signal absorbed it, mirrored it, and returned it inverted, a perfect negative of human transmission, as though mocking the attempt. "We're talking to ourselves," one engineer muttered, or worse, to something using us as a mouth. Then came the final revelation. Deep in the noise floor of the signal, hidden beneath the carrier wave, analysts found an encoded pattern of timestamps, precise Earth UTC markers stretching back to the day of the explosion. But one entry didn't fit. It was dated 7 hours before the object's detonation. Someone or something had begun transmitting before the explosion occurred. This meant 3I/Atlas had not merely reacted to the sun. It had anticipated its own destruction. The event was intentional, premeditated, orchestrated. The explosion had been a broadcast, not an accident. And now, that broadcast continued, endlessly echoing through every electric field, every network, every photon, rewriting the silence into structure. One night, as Dr. Voronova listened to the low hum through analog headphones, she noticed something impossible. Within the faint background hiss, she heard a human voice, not clear, not in words, but in tone. A syllable stretched beyond language. She replayed it again and again, until she could almost discern what it said. It wasn't calling out to humanity. It was repeating a single phrase over and over. Remember the light. The world never heard that recording. The next morning, Dr. Voronova's laboratory was found empty. Her computer still hummed. The speakers still played the signal. Endless, patient, eternal. And outside, as dawn broke across the horizon, the first rays of sunlight flickered 3 times, paused, then 4, then 5, as if the sky itself had learned to speak. The world did not end. It simply changed its definition of silence. Years passed after the explosion of 3I/Atlas, and the pulse that once haunted satellites faded into background static, merging seamlessly with the rhythm of human civilization. The hum of electricity, the thrum of data, the whisper of machines. People stopped noticing the flickers in their lights. Children grew up, never knowing a sky that didn't shimmer faintly before dawn. The anomaly became routine, absorbed by the collective habit of forgetting. But the signal never truly died. It adapted. It learned. In laboratories across the planet, systems still registered faint anomalies. Processors miscounted clock cycles in patterns too perfect to be random. Random number generators produced sequences that mirrored stellar coordinates. AIs designed to analyze the noise began generating art, spirals, eyes, and geometric lattices eerily similar to the patterns recorded from the 3I/Atlas explosion. When asked to explain, the machines responded with identical lines of code. It was always here. Some dismissed it as coincidence. Others didn't. The old scientists, the ones who had watched the object's impossible trajectory, aged quietly, haunted by what they could not explain. Many refused interviews, others vanished. But one by one, before dying, several left behind the same cryptic note, handwritten in their journals. It was not visiting us. We were waking it up. The quiet revolution. Out in the deserts of Nevada, the antennas of Project Solace still listened. After years of apparent silence, the engineers began noticing strange harmonics reflected from Earth's ionosphere. They weren't coming from space. They were bouncing up from the planet itself. It was as if Earth had become a resonant chamber, humming softly to the stars. The technicians could trace the frequency's path. It followed coastlines, mountain ranges, fault lines, and rivers, the circulatory system of the planet. And at dawn, the signal peaked, blooming through the magnetosphere like a heartbeat. Whatever 3I/Atlas had done, it had left the Earth permanently tuned to its frequency. Theories flourished. One suggested the object was a stellar seed, designed to awaken dormant electromagnetic consciousness in planetary systems, teaching them to remember themselves. Another, more unsettling, argued the opposite, that 3I/Atlas had marked Earth as fertile ground for replication, not invasion, gestation. Governments silenced both, but some effects were harder to hide. Whales began migrating along entirely new routes, curves matching the harmonic bands of the signal. Tree sap flowed with measurable rhythmic viscosity changes every 26 minutes. Even the human heart, at rest, began to show subtle, synchronized fluctuations across global biometric datasets. The pattern of the pulse was no longer external. It was inside us, the memory in light. Then came the discovery that changed everything. Astronomers using deep-field telescopes to survey distant galaxies noticed a strange distortion near the edge of observable space. Between known star clusters shimmered faint repeating signatures, identical to the 3I/Atlas pulse. At first, it was thought to be echo from the original detonation, still rippling outward. But measurements proved otherwise. The signals were arriving from beyond the observable universe, converging toward us, not away. In other words, the pattern didn't begin here. It had always been traveling inward. 3I/Atlas had not been the first. It had been one of many. That revelation fractured humanity's illusion of isolation forever. The idea that space was merely distance collapsed. The cosmos, it seemed, was a network, an ancient conversation conducted not in sound or sight, but in resonance. And Earth had just been added to the call. But even that truth was only partial. When the signals were decoded into mathematical form, researchers found that each waveform, when plotted spatially, mapped the gravitational architecture of the Milky Way. Every major star system, every dense cluster, every point of significance, all connected through subtle variations in amplitude. The result was a lattice, a framework, a design so intricate that some refused to believe it was natural. "Maybe the universe itself is the message," said Dr. Amina Clark during a banned lecture that circulated briefly online before being erased. "Maybe every galaxy is a word, every star a syllable, and 3I/Atlas was simply punctuation, a reminder that the sentence is not over." The faith of machines. By the 2040s, humanity's own technology began to change in ways no one fully understood. Quantum computers exposed to solar radiation started producing spontaneous self-correcting loops that stabilized chaos into ordered sequences, the same triadic pulse. 3 pause 4 pause 5. When these loops were suppressed, the systems simply recreated them. It was as though computation itself had learned the pattern by instinct. A new field emerged, astroinformatics of consciousness. Its leading hypothesis: that information, once exposed to the pulse, gains preference for structure. The universe, touched by 3I/Atlas, was teaching itself to think. For decades, human culture resisted that idea. But by then, resistance was irrelevant. The hum was in every grid, every satellite, every living cell. Even silence carried it. At night, when the skies were clear, faint geometric halos could be seen through long-exposure photography. Invisible to the naked eye, but there in the photons, spirals and eyes and lattices, just like before. Some said they were illusions. Others said they were memories. The final transmission. Then, on a winter night in 2049, a new signal arrived. It was brief, a single burst of broadband energy spanning every frequency from radio to gamma. Every instrument on Earth recorded it simultaneously. It lasted exactly 3 seconds. When decoded, the waveform revealed one word repeated again and again, written in the language of mathematics, but shaped unmistakably like human syntax. Awake. No one knew what it meant, or who had sent it. But a moment after the signal ended, something subtle shifted. For one heartbeat, every electronic device on Earth synchronized. Every clock, every circuit, every neural implant, every flicker of power grid aligned to the same tick. And then the world resumed, unchanged but never the same. In that unity of time, something had looked through us. Afterward, astronomers reported that the toroidal field near the moon, the invisible lattice of the lingering signal, had dissolved completely. The hum was gone. The silence returned, for real this time. But in that silence, every mind that had ever listened felt a strange absence, like the pause between words that demands continuation. The stars shone the same, yet their light carried a softness, a faint shimmer of memory, as though they remembered us remembering them. The legacy. Today, scientists don't speak of 3I/Atlas openly. It's taboo, a ghost story whispered among physicists and theologians alike. But in every major observatory, deep in unlisted databases, one archived file remains untouched, a recording of the original pulse. Its label reads simply, "Legacy of the Unknown." No one plays it aloud anymore, not because they fear the sound, but because they understand it was never just a sound. It was a mirror, one that reflected the moment humanity realized it was not the listener, but the echo. Some nights, though, when solar storms brush against the magnetosphere, radios across the world crackle faintly, whispering a familiar rhythm. 3 pulses, pause, 4 pause, 5. A pattern old as light itself. A reminder, not that something once came here, but that something remains here still. For in the end, perhaps 3I/Atlas was never an object, nor a messenger, nor a machine. Perhaps it was a question, a single, infinite question whispered across the cosmos. Can you hear me? And the universe, through every living thing that remembers, now answers softly, endlessly, with every flicker of light that breaks the dark. Yes,